In certain societies, prisoners are looked down upon as inhuman, therefore getting the worst punishments possible, ranging from mere foot whipping all the way to gasoline-filled tires being placed around their neck and set ablaze. Let's look at the top 10 used, from brutal to haunting. Foot whipping. Foot whipping, a very common punishment used for prisoners in the 1950s throughout Central Europe, especially in German territories, involved prisoners who were either caught stealing or convicted of it in the first place. In Germany, this occurred during evening roll call. Prisoners were stood over a special construction called the goat. The prisoners' feet were then immobilized in a wooden box, and their stomach rested on the goat. Then the prisoners' arms were stretched forwards, with other prisoners assisting in holding them down. Then, using heavy sticks or a massive bullwhip, the prisoner was then whipped, and was forced to call out the number of whips as they were given. If they happened to lose count, the punishment started all over from the beginning. The highest blows given were apparently 25, all to the soles of their feet, which might not seem bad at first, but when you realize that they had to walk afterward, it seems way more unforgiving, often leaving the prisoners with a permanent limp or not able to walk at all, with their feet being totally shredded at the bottom and mangled. Water torture. Chinese water torture, first used inside of the 15th century, definitely deserves our next spot, including a prisoner, usually for interrogation purposes, was tied to a water spout in which they were forced to look up while drops of water were slowly dripped at irregular paces onto their forehead. This causing an ulcer to form on their forehead over time, as this process would go on for several days, with the prisoner not even knowing what's going on and not given a certain stopping point. This caused the prisoners to gain psychosis, experience delusions, and made them lose touch with reality. This was mainly given for interrogation purposes, meaning that if they never got the information, the person never stopped being tortured, to either the executioner got bored and finished them off, or their heads slowly sunk in from the water being dripped multiple weeks at a time. The pair of anguish. Pair of anguish, used in the 17th century by Europeans, was very horrific, punishing criminals that were accused of being disrespectful or talking back. This 4-leaf device was placed inside of the prisoner's mouth and then slowly opened with a screw in order to slowly mutilate the person from the inside out. This obviously tore up the prisoner's mouth, causing irreparable damage, and absolutely mutilated the inside of their mouth, caused them not to be able to eat for weeks without extraordinary pain, ripping out their teeth from the root, leaving them toothless, and suffering massive blood loss. The Spanish donkey. The Spanish donkey, used by Europeans in the 17th and 18th centuries, was definitely a force to be reckoned with, given to prisoners for minor infractions, involving prisoners being lifted up to 15 feet in the air on top of a sharp wooden board. They would then get their legs separated onto each side of the board, and weights would be added as necessary. This would cause the prisoner to be slowly ripped in half, but most of the time didn't involve any type of death unless it was from infection afterward. Tabas, a medieval Spanish torture technique, definitely crushed prisoners' hearts and dreams, as this was given to prisoners who stole, involving 4 tablets, 2 with narrow finger-sized holes, and 2 with toe-sized holes. A wedge was placed in between each hole by the punisher, and a hammer was slammed down on each one of the separate holes, crushing each one of the fingers and each one of the toes, one by one, in a gruesome scene, with some prisoners passing out, and other ones, of course, confessing to their crime of stealing. I'm sure whether they did it or not, they definitely pleaded, with some being let go and others just getting all of their toes and fingers crushed. And with stubbing your toe already being quite painful, I imagine this would be extraordinarily painful for any prisoner facing this fate. Even though obviously they would die from it, I'm sure this is almost a fate worse than death, as afterward, provided no medical care, they would not be able to use any of their hands or fingers that were crushed, with their bones being absolutely pulverized and unusable. Death by sawing. Death by sawing, used in the medieval period by Europe, it definitely cut the prisoner's chances in half. Given to prisoners who had attempted to escape, the prisoner was suspended upside down on a wooden board, and the executioner would cut from the groin all the way to the head using a massive saw, leaving their organs cut in half with their guts spilling out all over the floor, in a gruesome scene. Now back then, executioners were definitely not skilled with saws, so the prisoner was definitely zigzagged down and died a horrific death, with sometimes the executioner choosing to cut off each of the arms and legs before actually killing the prisoner. But either way, it definitely ended with massive blood loss, causing the prisoner to die. Holding. Holding, used in Rome during the medieval ages, was a punishment given to prisoners that had bad interactions with other prisoners, be that fighting or getting into arguments a lot. One of the prisoners was then thrown into the hole, in which was an extremely isolating space, meant to be cramped and major body deteriorate. Unable to move, stand, walk, or even lay down, prisoners were forced in the most uncomfortable position ever, unnaturally bending their bones. Eventually, the prisoner was brought out, but during this, the prisoner was cramped, was not able to see the sun, and was definitely crowded with rats, slowly eating off the prisoner's skin as they were unable to move and had to sleep, causing massive lesions and infection over time. Bed pressing. Bed pressing, used in the 1700s in China, was definitely not about sleeping. Used whenever the prisoners would not do work or wake up. They were tied to a small wooden structure in which they were sat down on top of with their legs tied and their upper body sitting up straight with their hands tied behind their back. Then a board would be placed on top of them, and other prisoners and guards would be forced to step on top of them and crush them. Especially choosing heavier guards, they would jump on top of them, causing irreparable skeleton and spine damages, and sometimes even leaving the person brain dead, with multiple skeletal fractures, causing their brain to turn to mush. From the sheer stomping power of the guards, who definitely despised their prisoners in their sadistic manner, wanting them to die. Execution by elephant. Execution by elephant was used in the 19th century in Asia. This might have involved elephants, but it definitely was not a petting zoo. The basic punishment was death by elephant, involving stomping of the head. Now, of course, it wasn't just a complete stomp. Most of the time, it was an agonizing and slow death on purpose given to war prisoners, with only the worst executioners controlling the elephants, specifically training them to make it the worst death possible, even adding spikes to the end of the elephant's feet in order to slice the prisoner as they were crushed. The executioner controlling it even sometimes tied rope to the prisoner's legs and then tied it to the elephant, making the elephant kick back and forth, as the human leg is no match for the elephant's sheer strength, and it was ripped off after being rocked back and forth a couple times. Of course, doing that to people's heads, causing decapitation, and various other body parts, including heads, causing the prisoners to be decapitated from the neck up. Also making the elephant slowly walk over the person, 1 foot at a time, causing extreme pulverization to any part of the human it fully stepped on. This execution method being done to over 300 prisoners during a time of war. Even a sort of parade was thrown, with humans being thrown into hordes of multiple elephants designed just for crushing people, with elephants taking their trunks, throwing them up in the air, and then immediately stomping on them with no mercy. Injections. They were definitely one of the worst by far prison torture methods that I can even think of. Sure, maybe the prisoner didn't die, but prisoners were injected with all sorts of things, including psychedelic compounds, making the prisoners hallucinate for up to 100 days straight, and being, of course, injected with all sorts of cancers in order to see what happens, swapping blood with cancer patients, and being injected with STDs such as syphilis. Of course, these were used as punishments whenever the prisoners did something, and in order to find out more stuff, even though this was definitely unethical and extremely inhumane. So a fate worse than death, being injected with all sorts of disgusting compounds that you have no idea what they even are, with prisoners sometimes being blindfolded to make sure they had no idea when the injection was coming, leading them to have no clue what even might be coming up. Necklacing. Necklacing was used in South Africa during the late 20th century, and this method was definitely haunting. Akin to the witch trials, a person was placed with a tire around their neck, this tire being filled with massive amounts of gasoline, and then the executioner would set the tire ablaze, causing molten rubber to be poured all over the prisoner's neck. Used as a method to torture war prisoners, it was truly horrific, leaving these prisoners with scarring memories before they die, as they often did from the molten rubber and the infection afterward. Obviously, the prisoners knowing this was going to happen, as they smelled the gasoline around them after the tire was put around their neck, causing them not only leave with haunting memories, but a horrific death to see them out. Ranging from brutal to haunted, the worst punishment given to prisoners. Goodbye.